Did you know that since the 1750s, all men have been women? Yeah, I was surprised too. But according to this book from 1757, the ruling manners of our women are essentially the same with those of the men. The sexes have now little other apparent distinction beyond that of person and dress. Their peculiar and characteristic manners are confounded and lost, the one sex having advanced into boldness, as the other have sunk into effeminacy. Ooh, I wonder which one's which. It turns out that for the past 250 years, all men have been women, all women have been men, and no one noticed. And it's all the fault of pasta. In the 1760s, a new kind of men's fashion takes London by storm and brings about the death of civilization as we know it. Men dress as women, the poor pretend to be rich, and good stout Englishmen go around looking French. These snappy dresses are called macaronis. Yes, as in stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Our text for today is Pretty Gentleman by Peter McNeil, which is the best book on the topic that I've found. It seems like he managed to sneak into a load of stately homes and take photos of portraits that are normally part of private collections so nobody ever sees them, which have been really useful to me in putting together this video. So,
on the morning of Diana's death, the switch was finally thrown. The feminisation of politics was complete. Tony Blair turned into a girl.
The modern Englishman is getting too soft. The Englishman's cold tub, once historic and universal in this country, is now rapidly going out of fashion. A hot bath may make him cleaner, but another sign of growing softness is the use of spats.
There is a want of energy about the young men of today. They lead too soft a life. They do not get sufficient riding to make them hard.
The race of girlish men is increasing.
Once on a time, they say, I know not when, that girls wore caps of wisdom, men were men. Unlike those exquisites new seasons yield, who think they solely occupy the field of gallantry.
To a modern person, it can be difficult to tell the difference between regular fashion and this macaroni subculture, although it would be really obvious at the time, so we've got to train our eyes a bit. Mainstream men's fashion before macaronis looks like this. You wear a three-piece suit, which is breeches, a waistcoat and a coat, and it's either plain or it has a big brocade pattern. The coat flares out at the waist and it goes all the way down to your knees. You've got a wig, which is flat on top with big curls at the sides. You might wear bright, saturated colours in London or as part of your military uniform. And when you go to the country, you might wear more muted browns and greens. So how would a macaroni be different? Well, like with any subculture, no one person wears all the different bits at once. But here are some things to look out for if you're going macaroni spotting. The macaroni wig is kind of high and pointy. There are a lot of satirical cartoons about macaronis where the hair is really silly, but you can also find normal portraits of macaronis where it's a bit more realistic looking. You can see it's just got a little bump on top compared with a normal one. At the back of the wig, you'd have a big ponytail called a queue. These wigs need a lot of product, so to avoid getting the back of your jacket all smeared with grease and powder, you tie the ponytail in a big black silk bag with a bow. This is usually the best way to spot macaronis in paintings, the big black bow behind them. Their sleeves and their breeches are cut tight, and their coats are shorter than normal. You can see they stop just above the knees. It seems like a tiny difference to us, but people go on and on about it at the time. Pale colours for your suit are really popular, especially pale pink and pale green. You have tiny embroidery of flowers and berries and sometimes even insects around the edges of your waistcoat and the hems of your sleeves. But the real distinguishing feature of the macaroni is his accessories. Again, no one macaroni is going to have all this stuff at once, but you want to look out for big ostentatious square buckles on shoes, spyglasses, bouquets of flowers on the lapels, swords that are almost like jewellery, shoes with red heels, tiny tricorns, and jewelled snuff boxes. Macaronis are really into symmetry, so much so that you'd sometimes have a second fake pocket watch to balance out the real one. Macaroniing is mostly a men's fashion. Some people at the time do try and coin Macaroness or Lady Macaroni, but it doesn't catch on in the same way. Famous Macaronis include Richard Cosway, the Reverend Dodd, Joseph Banks, Humphrey Repton, Julius Soubise, and Charles James Fox, who, because of his name, sometimes gets portrayed in political cartoons as a furry. Okay, great, but why are they named after pasta? The term macaroni is a bit weird because we don't know who came up with it, and it doesn't even really seem like it's something macaronis call themselves. The word has been floating around as an insult for a while, like how you might call someone a noodle or noodle-headed. But the reason it gets attached to our boys is because, it's because of the 7 Years' War. Churchill was right, it was the First World War. Okay, so the 7 Years' War was a massive global conflict between Great Britain and Prussia on one side and France and Austria on the other. That's right, America. We've been warring with other countries behind your back. And you know what? It's been going great, actually. This thing was huge and went on all over the world in European colonies. And while it was on, British people couldn't go to the continent because of the fighting. And then in 1763, we won, and finally, wealthy Englishmen can go to the continent again. They flood into Rome and Florence, and especially Paris. And they fill their boots with all the French fashions they can get their hands on. So because it's a European style, it gets a European name. The English have never particularly cared to tell the French and the Italians apart. But the name doesn't really stick until the most famous actor of the day, David Garrick, plays a character called Il Marchese di Macaroni in a play called The Male Coquette. So macaronis are named after a fictional character who is named after the pasta. They're not quite the same thing as a fop. Fop is, again, a word that had been around for ages and just nebulously describes any kind of effeminate, overdressed man, not a particular subculture. And it's absolutely not the same thing as a dandy, which is later and more about really subtle fashion choices and being careful with your tie knots. God, the 7 Years' War is so big and complicated and hard to wrap your head around. And it doesn't help that almost no one's made a movie about it. Have you seen Barry Lyndon? No, you haven't. Don't lie. I've got to admit that for a long time, I hated the Georgian period. Partly it was the fact that for some reason, when I was a kid, the entire 18th century was simply not on the curriculum. 7 Years' War, beginning of the Industrial Revolution, height of the East India Company, height of the transatlantic slave trade, the bloody code, body snatching, enclosures, the Napoleonic Wars. Unimportant. If you're my age, or even if you're a fair bit younger than me, the Georgians might simply be a foreign country to you outside of, I don't know, is Pirates of the Caribbean supposed to be 18th century? It's unclear.
What are you looking at? Back to work.
Apart from that, most English history books about this period use these James Gilroy and Thomas Rowlandson cartoons as illustrations, and guys, can I be honest? I hate these. They're so mean. If you read British history books, it's like there was just 50 years where everyone turned into a pig, and then it's the Victorians. A lot of what I do is about making you feel closer to people in the past, and these make me feel so far away. I can't imagine these people with their own inner worlds. These aren't meant to be understood. They are horrifying, gurning masks. I know that empathy isn't what Gilroy was going for, so I don't really blame him, I guess, except for making bad art. But the way his stuff is used by historians completely turned me off the whole period for ages. And I'm going to have to use these cartoons in the video too, because they are most of the pictures of macaronis. Okay, so macaroni fashion is maybe a little silly, but it's not the downfall of civilization as we know it, right? Wrong, you idiot! People hate macaronis. There are anti-macaroni plays and songs and magazines and so many cartoons. In 1772, a young surgeon is walking around Lambeth dressed in a little green frock coat, which he had brought from Paris, when he is attacked by 3 of those gentlemen of the nobility who, taking him for a Frenchman, not only abused him with the foulest language, but gave him 2 or 3 slaps on the face. Macaronis are seen as frivolous, spending money on silly things like wigs when the economy was in complete shambles. Ah yes, that's the reason we've got no money. It's the wigs. Although the original macaronis are wealthy men, the fashion catches on with people all over the social order. So working class macaronis are ridiculed for dressing above their station. Like, it's one thing to dress very impractically when you just sit around gambling all day, but when you've got an actual job to do, you've got to really want to wear that long ponytail. You've got to commit. One poem said, "E'en farmers dress and mount their ponies, and all alike are macaronis." People also don't like them because it's a French style. One letter to a young macaroni reads, "For God's sake, return home. Nature never meant you for a Frenchman. Burn your formal bagwig and put on your far more agreeable scratch." A scratch being an old-style wig. English people think of the French as their natural enemies and counterparts. We're on and off at war with France for basically the whole century. French people are scrawny, wine-drinking, effeminate, overly dressed, airheaded, and living under a tyrannical king, whereas the Chad Brit eats lots of red meat, drinks beer, is manly, simply dressed, clear-thinking, and not afraid to kick out his king and install a different one if he wants. French fashions are quite different to English ones. Frenchmen still kiss as greeting, whereas we've dropped that a couple decades ago. When the Marquis de Falaiseau arrives in London, he gets laughed at in the street, and he realises it's because he's carrying a muff, which in France is gender neutral, but in England is seen as a woman's accessory. But the war is over. Britain has finally proven her supremacy, her superiority over the world, and then all of the rich men in London go right back over there to copy their fashions. We've beaten them! They should be copying us! One article says that macaroni fashion is to the disgrace of our noble, patient British race. But the main problem with macaronis is that they aren't manly enough. Men are in crisis, and you can tell because they're wearing tiny hats, like cucks. So, let me get this straight. This is manly, this is effeminate. It's just the natural order. We evolved to hunt the mammoth and wear flat wigs like God intended. Macaronis are being made fun of for being interesting in fashion and shopping and the textile arts, with one pamphlet saying, "Hark, with what a feminine softness his accents steal their way through his half-opened lips. Feel that soft palm, those slender fingers, accustomed only to handle silks and ribbons, the easy piercing needle or soft gliding shuttle, but unpractised in the rough exercises of warlike weapons." I am truly sorry to have to show you these hideous cartoons, but the joke is that they're simpering, flaccid she-he's. They're often drawn as hairdressers and portrayed as having lost their masculinity. There are a few cases of macaronis with gay sex scandals, one of which is the army chaplain Robert Newberg, who is stationed in Philadelphia during the American Revolutionary War. In 1769, word gets out that he's sleeping with his manservant, and by the time he rejoins his regiment across the Atlantic, word has already got out. It doesn't help that his macaroni style is also seen as a threat to masculinity. His officers freeze him out, mock him openly, and pull him up on trumped-up charges of disobedience and insubordination. Rather than run back home with his tail between his legs, Newberg decides to stand his ground. Here to explain what happened to him is Joel Cook from PBS's Rogue History.
Thanks, Jay. With the risk of unemployment, loss of honor, and maybe even execution, Robert Newberg felt that he had to do something drastic. He convinced a soldier in the regiment to accuse him directly of buggery so that he could be charged with homosexuality once and for all, and put the issue to rest. The Royal Irish officers would be forced to testify in front of men who could end their careers if they lied under oath. But unfortunately for our swanky little chaplain, his plot was discovered. Instead of fighting a buggery charge, he was now facing a general court-martial for perjury due to his vicious and ungentlemanlike behavior. But what was most fascinating about the 1774 court-martial of Robert Newburgh was the way in which he defended himself. Though he remained a loyal British subject, Newburgh defended his position as a queer man with revolutionary thought. When the prosecution, accused him of being a macaroni, Newburgh argued that he had a right to freedom and privacy so long as his character and ethics were good. He was found guilty of falsehood and impropriety in his conduct, but the generals also noted that there was no proof to support the accusations of buggery. Though he was eventually pardoned, he still suffered the indignity of having his personal life put on trial. And even for all of his efforts, there was no major cultural shift because of the trials of Robert Newburgh.
Thanks, Joel. However, most macaronis, even really prominent ones with lots of political enemies, like Charles James Fox, never have a gay sex scandal. What people are more worried about is that they are effeminate. Effeminacy at the time isn't always associated with homosexuality. These guys aren't pinging people's gaydars necessarily. And in fact, some cartoons show men becoming macaronis in order to get chicks. No, they're bad because they're breaking gender roles. Macaronis are constantly talked about as if they're a weird third gender. You got men, women, and these freaks. I am going to speak of that wretched thing called a macaroni. To the naturalists, I leave it to determine whether it is masculine, feminine, or neuter. I have more sense than to call it masculine, but I shall call it he for my own convenience. Yeah, they were having pronoun discourse in the 1760s. One writer is so furious at macaronis usurping the proper occupations of women that he recommends conscripting them into the army as cannon fodder. National service, that'll straighten them out. There's a neo-fascist slogan online that hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times, where strong men are, I guess, soldiers who are willing to be cannon fodder for the fatherland, and weak men are, I suppose, feminist soy boy cucks. Macaronis. Why macaronis are not good at running the country? Unclear. But if you follow that logic, well then, surely you can create strong men on purpose by making their lives hard for no reason. So if the leader of your country conscripts you into the army, if your boss makes you poor, if your favourite podcaster tells you to wake up at 4 a.m. and do 1,000 press-ups before breakfast, you mustn't complain, because he's making you into a strong man. It's for your own good. One of humankind's most primal fears is the blurring or breaking of boundaries. Sometimes this makes a lot of sense. There's good reason for us to fear, for example, a knife breaking the boundary of our skin, or a disease breaking the boundary of our body. But sometimes this instinct leads humans to create a boundary, to straight make one up, and then get terrified that the boundary's going to be broken. Macaronis, for example, blur the boundary between England and France. The Englishmen are all becoming French. Soon we'll all be wearing berets and speaking Verlan, and there'll be no Englishmen left at all. We have to defend our culture. One poem said that fashion itself is a dangerous French import brought over here to poison the minds of the noble, pure English people and enslave them. Its portrait to Great Britain's sons is known. Were it to France and Italy confined, from whence it came to taint the English mind, send back the siren to her native shore, and make each Briton great as heretofore. No longer slaves to fashion let them be, but like their fathers, generous, bold and free. A macaroni, though, somehow gives up his Englishness by putting on French-style clothes. Like, if they're clothes made by an English tailor, owned by an English man, they're English clothes, my guy. I don't know what to tell you. There's a cartoon from this time that makes it explicit, with a macaroni hatching from an egg, saying, "Behold a monster bursting to the view, nor Turk, not Christian, pagan he nor Jew, no Sawney Scot, Welsh taff or Irish honey, but manhood's jest, a London macaroni. God, if you're going to be this weird, you could at least make a proper rhyme. Macaronis also blur the boundary between rich and poor. If a working class man dresses as a macaroni, then how can we even tell who's rich and poor anymore? The newspapers describe macaroni fashion using that language of disease penetrating the body. The infection of St. James's was soon caught in the city, and we now have macaronis of every denomination, from the colonel of the trained bands down to the errand boy. They're so scared that poor people don't look as poor as they expect, that they might be polite to someone thinking they're rich, only to find out that they've just been polite to an errand boy. Gross! And macaronis blur the boundary between men and women. But macaronis are a sex which do philosophers perplex, though all the priests of Venus rites agree they are hermaphrodites. But we just made all these borders up. The border between Britain and France, for example, is made up. I know there's a little bit of sea there, but no more sea than is between me and, say, Orkney, or Northern Ireland, or the Falklands. When I was a kid, I assumed the Falklands were in Scotland, because Scotland has a lot of islands, but no, it's over here. And apparently that's ours, but France isn't. We decided that the Channel was important. Seals don't recognise it. Nature doesn't recognise it. And there's definitely nothing in science that says big shoe buckles are inherently French. So what happened? Did civilization collapse? Did men all die out? Heck, did we even get taken over by the French? No. Wish we had. Maybe I could get some decent cider. You can't actually hurt this boundary because it's not real. You definitely can't hurt it with tight trousers. The word masculinity was first written down in 1748, not that long before macaronis came on the scene. And masculinity has been in crisis ever since. Every generation thinks that their men are weaker, softer, and more effeminate than ever before, and it's never been true. Because no matter what men wear, or how they speak, or who they sleep with, or how good they are at press-ups, their masculinity is not in crisis. Because if a man is doing it, then it is masculine. I know that doesn't mean much coming from someone who looks like me. For the people who need to hear it, they really need to hear it coming from a bloke. And if there are any feminist ally blokes in the audience who want to know how they can help without talking over women, if you could take this one, it'd be fantastic. But if you won't listen to me, maybe you'll listen to the weight of history. Guys, I have some great news. You're not in crisis. Or at least you're not any more in crisis than you were in 1776. If someone tries to tell you you're less manly or not manly enough, that doesn't even fucking mean anything. They're just trying to make you feel insecure, so you buy their pills or go on their course or vote for their guy. You could literally wear a big powdered wig and lace cuffs, and I promise it won't cause the downfall of men. And I know, because we already tried it.
Hard times create hard men. Hard men create soft times. Soft times create soft men. Soft men create hard times. We are now around soft men in hard times.
Men need to feel like they're in charge. No? I mean, they do.
I think I agree. It's to do with a competency, a control of oneself and one's own emotions, leadership from the front, taking responsibility.
You're supposed to be a warrior. You're supposed to be a warrior. You're at home changing diapers.
Okay, so there's this meme which is like strong men create, what is it? Strong men create
good times.
Good times create weak men.
A sort of anecdote about my son being involved in a bit of banter in the playground and him not understanding why the other boys seem to be being mean to him, but me taking great pleasure and going, no, son, what that is banter. They're just testing you out to see if you're weak.
Who is it that you want on the front lines fighting? Well, have a look at who gets conscripted, have a look who makes up the mass ranks of most military organisations, and the answer will become pretty obvious.
We don't learn how to shave from our fathers. It's a YouTube video.
Men need to be strong. They need to be protectors. Think about the jobs that you think of as being masculine. Fireman, cop.
Boys definitely need to toughen up.
Thank you for watching. I want to recommend PBS Rogue History's video on Robert Newber, which you can find in the description. Thank you so much to PBS for making this video with me. It was really nice to do so. And frankly, their video is much better looking than mine, so I very much recommend it. Check it out. Also, my monitor's not working again, so I don't know if I'm in frame for this one. Something else you can find in the description is my list of sources. I love when people read my sources. If you've ever read something from my sources, thank you so much. One of the house rules around here is that if you want to disagree with me, you do have to provide a source for yourself, and I'm really interested to read those as well when they come up. Anyway, my camera's probably overheated by now, so thanks very much to my patrons, and I'll see you next time.